The right role here is that government's job is to set fair, neutral rules, not hold stock certificates. If conservatives abandon that principle, they hand progressives the blueprint for permanent industrial policy. Washington should cut spending, balance the books, and let markets do what they do best: allocate capital, reward innovation, and drive prosperity. Hello. Welcome to this week's Economy. I'm your host, Dr. Vance Ginn. Thank you for joining me again today. It's a pleasure to have you with me. Hopefully you didn't miss the Let People Prosper show last Thursday. Great discussion with Ian Murray about freedom conservatism, a lot about what's going on in the economy, also a little bit about free market capitalism and whether it works with religion or not, and things of that nature. I think you'll really enjoy that one. Don't miss the upcoming one on this Thursday as well. Remember, I have 2 podcast episodes coming out every week. I hope you will watch those with the interviews that I do, and then also this one, which is this week's Economy. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Remember, you can find all this information and more at vanceginn.com and the show notes at vanceginn.substack.com, where I provide links and a lot more information. But I want to jump right into it because we do have a lot going on, so let's get to it. Many lawmakers have lost sight of the basic economic principles that build flourishing societies. From putting Washington in private boardrooms to imposing tariffs, the administration seems intent, it's the Trump administration, on focusing on anything but the real problem, which is runaway government spending. Inflation and many of today's economic woes are made worse by federal deficits that fuel higher interest rates and add relentless inflationary pressure. These challenges won't be solved by squeezing quote-unquote revenues out of private industry or taxing imports, tariffs. They'll only be solved by spending less, taxing less, and regulating less. That's the pro-growth path forward. We'll break down the latest news on these issues and more in this edition of This Week's Economy, so let's get going. Number 1, Washington in the boardroom. In the news, the Trump administration reportedly negotiating to turn Intel's $10.9 billion CHIPS Act subsidies into a 10% equity stake in the company. If finalized, Washington would rank among Intel's largest shareholders. This isn't the first move of its kind. Earlier this year, the Pentagon took a preferred equity position in MP Materials, the nation's largest rare earth mining firm, giving the government direct financial leverage over a critical supply chain. After Nippon Steel's bid for U.S. Steel, the administration secured a golden share, is what they called it, granting Washington veto power over everything from executive pay to plant closures. Officials have also floated proposals for the U.S. to receive direct payments from foreign resource revenues in exchange for trade or security guarantees. My take on this is that, we're moving from a referee to a player in the game for government, which is not good. The Intel deal is more than a one-off. It signals a broader shift. By taking equity stakes in private firms, government stops being the referee and becomes a competitor, a player in the game. That distorts markets, warps incentives, and leaves taxpayers holding the risk. The problem with this is that some conservatives defend these arrangements as quote-unquote strategic, arguing that America cannot rely on foreign suppliers for semiconductors, rare earths, metals, or steel. But when the government blurs the line between capitalism and state management, it undermines competition, politicizes corporate decisions, and shifts risk to taxpayers who never agreed to take them. The right role here is that government's job is to set fair, neutral rules, not hold stock certificates. If conservatives abandon that principle, they hand progressives the blueprint for permanent industrial policy. Washington should cut spending, balance the books, and let markets do what they do best: allocate capital, reward innovation, and drive prosperity. I recently broke some of this down in my Econ 101 explanation, where I show equity stakes are misguided in the Daily Economy. Don't miss that, American Institute for Economic Research, my piece over there in the Daily Economy. I broke all this down. You'll find the show notes page there as well. Number 2, unlawful tariff taxation. In the news, a federal appeals court ruled that President Donald Trump's tariffs unlawfully relied on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, to impose sweeping duties on imports. The court held that the law does not give the executive branch unilateral authority to levy tariffs. While the tariffs remain in effect under a temporary stay until October 14th, the case is headed for likely review by the U.S. Supreme Court. Relatedly, the president signed an executive order suspending the de minimis rule, which allows small imports to bypass fees for all U.S. goods. My take on this is that this is unconstitutional tariff taxation. This ruling by the court is a step in the right direction. Tariffs are taxes, plain and simple, and the Constitution clearly gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax. The Supreme Court now has a chance to reaffirm that no president can impose taxes by executive decree. That would be a win for taxpayers and for constitutional order. I should also note that this is only including the broader tariffs of the Liberation Day, quote unquote, Liberation Day sort of tariffs of 10% across the board for any imports. This isn't the Section 232 or the Section 301 tariffs that have emergency declarations and other things that could be used for national security, like on China or on aluminum and steel tariffs. I don't think those should exist either, but that would not be a part of this decision. Those can stay in place. It's the broader tariffs that are really the problem, or at least that weren't upheld by the court. What we need is no more exemptions for small imports, right? Tariffs create a maze of tax policies that distort markets, picking winners and losers, while encouraging companies to chase loopholes instead of profits. Removing exemptions like the de minimis carve-out only adds more complexity and cost, rather than solving the underlying problem. The real economic battle here is that tariffs miss the bigger picture. The true threat to our economy, guys, isn't trade imports. It's Washington's runaway spending. Deficit spending fuels higher interest rates and inflationary pressures as the Fed tries to suppress borrowing costs. America remains the most stable economy in the world, but lasting prosperity requires tackling the root problem, reining in spending, scrapping tariffs, and lowering taxes on hardworking Americans. Related to this, I broke down the court's ruling and joined a panel at NTD News with Daniel Lassell to discuss the real impacts of tariffs. You can watch that at the show notes page. Number 3, 800 plus laws go into effect in Texas. In the news, more than 800 new laws passed by the Texas legislature earlier this year and signed by Governor Abbott took effect September 1st, which is the start of the new fiscal year in Texas. Highlights include the state's $338 billion two-year budget, new funding for water projects through the Texas Water Development Board, a school choice program, education savings accounts, and expansion of the state's medical marijuana program. My take is that Texas budget is too big. It's the state's largest and arguably most progressive budget that should alarm every fiscal conservative or really any Texan across the board. Had Texas limited the growth of state funds to population growth plus inflation over the past decade, taxpayers would have saved $51 billion in excessive spending and taxation. Texas didn't become America's economic engine by spending like California. Lawmakers must reverse course with sustainable spending and real property tax relief with a path to elimination. As I talked about many times, that's really where it should be headed. There was nothing passed at all. We just finished our second special session. Nothing was done on banning taxpayer-funded lobbying. Nothing was done on property tax relief. And one good thing, though, is that they were able to stop the ban on THC and hemp. That bill failed. We'll see what happens. And there's calls already for a third special session. We'll see if Governor Abbott calls it. He hasn't yet by the time that I'm recording this. So we'll see what happens there. So when you look at school choice, yes, Texas finally passed school choice. Bravo. But it's far from universal. The ESA program is capped at no more than 100,000 students, barely 1.5% of Texas' 6.3 million school-age children. Worse, only a limited number of students from families earning above 500% of the poverty level, which is about $160,000 for a family of 4, can qualify. School choice isn't about rationing opportunity. It's about restoring it. Texas must expand the program, fully fund it, and give every child access to a better future while not increasing spending on the government school, the quote-unquote public education system. And what about THC and medical marijuana? Well, a surprising addition, House Bill 46 during the regular session expands the state's medical marijuana program. Meanwhile, lawmakers continue debating whether to regulate or ban hemp-derived THC products as the bill died in the second special session. Texas don't need the state babysitting them. They need government to get out of the way and let responsible adults make their own decisions. It only involves them. Why should the government come in and try to coerce them one way or the other? Related to this, after Governor Abbott signed SB 2, which was the School Choice Education Savings Accounts bill, I broke down the benefits and shortcomings of this school choice law on X. You can find that in the show notes page. Number 4, Congress returns to work on a continuing resolution. In the news, Congress is back from its month-long recess and must now hammer out a short-term spending deal to avoid a government shutdown on September 30th, when federal funding expires. My take is that we need to avoid a crisis. The U.S. is teetering on the edge of fiscal, monetary, and economic disaster. It's all of the above, folks. From federal debt, the federal debt has blown past $36 trillion, now at $37 trillion. Inflation remains a threat of above 3%, and higher interest rates are squeezing families and businesses alike. The last thing we need is more reckless spending. Shutdowns aren't the problem. Politicians routinely use the threat of shutdown to push through bloated bills, but they've already shut down schools, economies, and communities in recent years. Compared to that, a short federal shutdown might be the wake-up call Washington needs, forcing Congress to confront its true crisis, addiction to deficit spending. So what's a real solution? Balanced budgets are possible, even annually. Faster growth paired with strict spending restraint can get us there quickly. Congress should adopt sustainable reforms that cap annual budget growth to less than population growth plus inflation. The stakes couldn't be higher, guys. The time for excuses is over. You can check out my recent This Week's Economy episode for a deep dive on why federal spending restraint is essential. Number 5, U.S. jobs report reveals a weaker economy. In the news, in the first jobs report since President Trump dismissed the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the numbers came in worse than expected again. The economy added just 22,000 jobs last month, far below the forecast of 76,500. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate ticked up by 0.1 percentage points to 4.3%, the highest since October 2021. These disappointing results highlight the combined pressures of rising inflation and harmful tariffs, resulting in more Americans being out of work than there are jobs available. And that's also the first time in years. My take on this is the labor market has been weakening for more than a year. Even during the Biden administration, I've been talking about this. And if you've been listening, I've been talking about the weakness in the labor market and how it's going to continue to get weaker. Job revision cuts in earlier months, lower, and key sectors like manufacturing, which lost 12,000, wholesale trade, and mining continue to shrink. Long-term unemployment continues to rise, showing that opportunities are drying up for too many Americans. Policy is making things worse. Trump's tariffs and protectionist trade measures add uncertainty for businesses on top of the regulatory drag left over from the Biden's term. The One Big Beautiful Bill hasn't yet delivered its benefits, leaving workers squeezed between rising costs and fewer jobs. But look, the Fed must not make a bad situation worse. Core PCE inflation is still at 3.1%, well above the 2% inflation rate target. Cutting interest rates now would only fuel inflation while jobs stagnate, a recipe for stagflation. What we need instead is fiscal discipline, free trade, and pro-growth reforms that empower markets, not government. Related to this, I explained the highlights of the July jobs report last month, and I'll post one about this on the August one on my show notes page as well. Thanks for joining me in this episode of This Week's Economy. For more insights, visit vanceginn.com and get even greater value with a paid subscription to my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com. Hope you enjoyed this information. Please share with your friends and family. Until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.